Good morning, everyone. My name is Wilmarie Newton, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Should you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and we will answer your questions after the speakers have concluded their presentation. We will try to get through as many questions as time allows, but if you have further questions after the webinar has ended, please feel free to email our presenters and they will answer them at their earliest convenience. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under professional development. And now I'd like to turn it over to CABE's Executive Director, Robert Rader.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I am very glad to be a part of this webinar. I think there will be a lot of very interesting information for school boards and superintendents as we get ready to send in the first group of plans on Friday to the State Department of Education. CABE does not necessarily endorse all the things in this toolkit, but we thought it would be best to make sure that boards and superintendents have these considerations on reopening that the SLAM collaborative developed for us. There are other plans out there, but we thought this was an especially good one in as much as it really was Connecticut centric and could talk about some of the issues that you're all facing. We know that about a half an hour ago that CEA released its own plan for going back to school, which would, from what I understand, have more distance learning in it at the beginning of the year. But at this point, we haven't had a chance to analyze that plan, and certainly we will send out information to our members once we know more about it. I have gotten the chance over the last couple of weeks to work with the people from the SLAM Collaborative. We actually used some comments from our major speakers when I did an article for the CABE Journal and then the NSBA magazine on climate change. So it's a pleasure to work again with Kemp Morhardt. He is licensed by the American Institute of Architecture, and he is an architect. And Amy Mund Christmas, ALEP, who's an educational programmer and planner. I know they put this out only to be a benefit to boards of education and superintendents, and I think what they have put forward is very helpful. I will try to monitor the chat box as much as I can. 1 or 2 line questions are the best and easiest to read as we go forward. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kemp. Thanks, Kemp.
All right. Thank you, Bob, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Hopefully we will have a morning that will be informative and open discussion. We're pleased to be here to present some of the work that we've put together over the past few weeks to assist in the process of going back to school. My name is Kemp Morhardt. As Bob mentioned, I'm an architect and a principal with the SLAM Collaborative Architects. We're headquartered in Glastonbury, Connecticut. I've been designing educational facilities for the past 22 years of my career with a focus on the public K-12 market, and I lead the Connecticut public education practice for SLAM. With me is Amy Mund Christmas. As Bob mentioned, she's an accredited learning environment planner, and she is SLAM's lead educational programmer planner. Her expertise is programming the space needs for schools ranging from K-12 through higher ed, with the goal of ensuring that each space includes the amenities to facilitate the educational mission of our clients, as well as maximizing utilization of those spaces. Our goal with this operations planning toolkit for safe distance learning is to be part of the solution of getting back to school and work, specifically in Connecticut, but hopefully other states may find this on our website. We did include the link to the planning document in the webinar invite, and you can find it on our homepage on our website, which is at the top. And there's a red circle toward the bottom where if you just click on more, you'll be able to download the document. So this was initiated, this little document that we created was initiated by Amy and some others in our office to understand how the CDC guidelines of primarily 6-foot separation would affect the capacity of classrooms, specialty spaces, and overall school facilities. It's intended to provide insight on topics that district administration will consider when developing their own school reentry plans. This morning, we're going to review the contents of the publication in a slightly different order than that's presented in the actual PDF publication. We're going to start with discussing space capacity, because we feel that that's where, as architects, we bring our expertise to the table with how you may view the space capacity of your schools. We'll then touch on student learning modalities briefly, and then we have a series of slides that just touch on operational considerations that most of you, I'm sure, have already been considering, but there may be 1 or 2 items that maybe you haven't considered that we thought we might just brief through that. We expect that the presentation will be about 30 minutes with the balance of the hour dedicated to Q&A about the document and or just open discussion. There were a few discussion topics that we listed in the invite that I have some interest in discussing with you all, and hopefully we can just have a little bit of an open discussion about those topics. And just before Amy starts, she studied varying sized and shaped classrooms across several schools in our that we've designed. She's then reduced that data to what we believe is a useful tool that we feel will benefit district leadership in quickly assessing the capacity of their facilities. And the analysis is most applicable to the hybrid model as described in the Connecticut Department of Ed guidance document. And with that, I will turn it over to Amy.
Thanks, Kemp. So we understood that there were, we started this analysis back in actually March, April, around that time. And we were beginning to do our research and seeing how other countries were beginning to open their schools and what methods they were doing to, they were implementing to do that. And we realized there's a variety of methods that folks are looking at across the country and across the world. And so we were sort of looking at all the different ways that might happen, all realizing that as we bring children and teachers back into the building, and we are still encouraged to what we're calling safe distance within the school facility, what does that mean for how many people you can fit in the building, and also how many teachers you're going to need to teach those students if we're now broken up into different groupings. And so here is an example, or a variety of examples, but not the only examples of what we realized were going on that sort of guided why we would need to understand how many people we can get back into the building. For instance, to understand if we're going to do an A day in school learning, a B day at home online, oh, but we might need a C day because of how many students we can or cannot fit into our buildings. So the diagrams that you will see in this document are basically explained here. The pink or salmon colored circles represent a 7-foot diameter. We chose 7 feet just to give a little bit of wiggle room. We know that little kids don't sit still very often, so we gave ourselves about a foot wiggle room in the middle of that bubble. And also the blue circles represent where an instructor would be located. So as Kemp mentioned, we took recent projects, recent floor plans, so you'll see some new sort of shaped and outfitted learning environments, but we also looked at some of our clients' previous buildings or the buildings that they had before renovation, because we do realize that the state of Connecticut does have, some aging facilities out there that we're still using. And so understanding what the balance between those two types of environment would be. A couple notes, we do realize that paraprofessionals and other folks, other adults do come into the classroom. And so in some cases, you might have to reduce the number of one of those salmon circles to add an additional blue for another adult in the classroom. One little note at the bottom of the slide. So if we have to socially distance or safe distance our students in the corridor, if we're going to the bathroom, if we're walking down to the gymnasium, or just, at the end of the day, and they have to walk down that corridor, knowing that just 11 students potentially in a classroom will take 60 feet of length in one of your hallways to be able to safe distance them down the corridor and down the stairs to get to where it is they need to be. We read an article yesterday where, beginning to implement the culture of what that means. Little kids now are walking with their arms straight out down the corridor, so they know that that is what they have to be away from each other. And so we're going to talk about other ways of sort of implementing that so that everybody's in the know of what they're supposed to be doing. So as Kemp mentioned, we went through, we analyzed all of I'm not even sure how many, a lot of schools, classrooms, varying grades from kindergarten classrooms all the way up through 12th grade classrooms. We demonstrated the area of each room, the original capacity, how many bubbles we could get into each of those rooms depending on the layout of those spaces. We sorted those in a variety of ways to see where we can find some similarity that would give us a rule of thumb that we can then apply and be able to give to you as a tool. And what we found was it was the actual area of the classroom that allowed us to sort of get a general net square foot per seat when implementing that 7-foot circle diameter. So the analysis is along the bottom of the screen, and the groupings that you see from left to right demonstrate the first grouping on the left are classrooms that fell within 600 to 699 square feet. The middle, or the next one to the right, is groupings of classrooms from 700 to 799 square feet, and so on across from left to right. And the blue bubbles identify the net square foot per seat that we were yielding when we did those analysis with those 7-foot bubbles. Essentially getting us to the punchline at the top of the screen, where you can see if you have a 725 square foot classroom and you have those marching down your hallway on both sides of your hallway, you're going to yield between 11 and 12 students in those classrooms, which is about 65 net square foot per seat. That would allow your facility folks within your districts to be able to go through very quickly and know, okay, on this floor or in this hallway or in this wing, this is times the number of classrooms, this is how many kids we can get back in this side of the building, and quickly get you to a number so that as you're looking across your district, you can begin to think about those plans that will accommodate your situation. Now, we do know that there are some anomalies, and there were 3 or 4 that we came up with that were pretty prevalent, or they jumped off the page at us. Kindergarten classrooms typically are done very differently than most other grades. Those students don't usually sit at a desk or a table from the minute they get to school until the minute they leave. And so they do need to have a little bit more flexibility in how you're delivering or how you're setting up that classroom for them. So you may provide a seat for each student. So if they're having snacks or lunch within the classroom, that they have their own designated area within their 6-foot bubble. But also realizing that what you see on the right-hand side of this slide demonstrates the amount of furniture you might have to remove from those rows. And so understanding the storage that may be needed to accommodate these schools in excess furniture, it might be a very real thing. The second anomaly is when you're walking those corridors is to understand the layout of your classrooms. It's just not a cut and dry sort of thing, but it is sort of an overarching toolkit. But also understanding if you have a classroom like the one in the upper right-hand corner where you have cubbies, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but down here in the bottom left corner of that classroom, their cubbies are within the classroom. Well, if you have students that need to access those cubbies on a regular basis, they're getting snack, they're getting their homework out, that type of thing, you're not going to put a bubble right there because that person's going to be in jeopardy of being passed by a variety of kids throughout that day. So that's one anomaly where this room might be a little bit lower on the capacity scale. Another thing to consider, if you have a dedicated bathroom off of a classroom, similar to that particular one in the upper right-hand corner, or other doors, again, constant traffic going to a location like that, again, will keep you from providing a desk potentially in that upper left-hand corner of that room. So this is another anomaly we want to make sure that you realize that the architecture of your space may dictate how ultimately the spaces will lay out. And the third anomaly is if you have severe proportions in your classroom, so like a 1 to 2, like you see here, where that teaching wall, identified by that blue stripe, is where that teacher is going to be walking back and forth, writing on the board, pointing on the smart board, that type of thing. Again, next to that door, you're not going to put bubbles of students there that the teacher has to walk around or avoid. You're going to keep that clear. And so that we found in our analysis was driving the numbers down just a little bit as well. So the punchline here is it's not a cut and dry. You have a classroom of 28 seats today, and that come September, you're going to have 14. That's not necessarily the case. It's something a little bit more scientific than that, as we have found in these analyses. And there's one more anomaly we didn't have in the slideshow, and it's if you have tables versus individual desks. You could certainly space your students apart, but you might have to sort of adjust based on the number of desks or tables you will have in those rooms. Go ahead, Bob.
Amy, I just want to remind everybody that as far as the space requirements go, this department says you social distance when feasible. It's not absolute, it's not all the time, but these are considerations if you try really hard to make that social distancing work.
Exactly.
Correct. Yep. Thanks for that clarification, Bob.
Sure.
So we also did a couple layouts and some other different types of spaces. For instance, in science labs where you may have fixed casework, you might have to be creative of where you place those student stations, but it can be done. So if you have individual tables in the center, but you also have perimeter casework where stations could be, maybe students are spaced out individually around the room, something like that. Taking a look at your gymnasiums and potentially even your cafeterias. The green boxes you see on this slide identify a 10-foot by 10-foot square, spaced apart by about 30 inches or so that you have some circulation pads. But if this is an opportunity where students can still participate in some kind of physical education, whether it's yoga or mindfulness or just going and stretching out and just getting the wiggles out, but they can do it separate from one another when it's not, good weather and you can't go outside. But also this is an area where you might be able to, if you have a curtain dividing your gymnasium in one of your institutions, that you see in the upper diagram, where you might be able to provide extra learning environments. Some of that extra furniture you're offloading from those classrooms can go here. Maybe this is where your special ed classes can be relocated to, so they have a little bit more room to move about and circulate. Maybe this is where testing may happen. We also took a look at libraries. So the top one looks at how a new library may be outfitted with different collaboration zones, some stacks, some computer stations. The middle layout is where you might add some of that furniture that's offloaded from your classrooms to provide an additional learning environment here. And then the bottom one is taking out all of the library furniture and putting in that extra classroom furniture to, again, provide additional learning environments for students who may be doing an online learning and may just have an adult sort of circulating around but not getting the direct instruction because this is their B day maybe. So we applied that to a case study just to see how that would work. And this is what we would think that you guys would be able to implement if this is appropriate for you all. Here is a school that is 2 stories. It is an elementary school, kindergarten through 5th grade. We counted 19 general purpose classrooms, which does include one inclusive special ed classroom where students would be. It has a seating capacity in those classrooms of 486 seats that accommodate the 482 students that go to school here. When we applied the math and the numbers that we showed back on that slide 20, you can see the comparison in the upper right-hand corner. So the original capacity plan had 19 classrooms with 486 seats to support the 482 students. The school also has learning commons and art classrooms and music classrooms. That supplementary 24 spaces add an additional 319 seats, which gives us about 805 seats to educate 482 students with a full, robust curriculum. Once we have the safe distance and put these bubbles in place, the same 19 classrooms will only yield 210 seats. And now that if we were to implement 25 additional specials and other types of academic support spaces, and you notice that goes up by 1 because we've now added the cafeteria dining area as now a potential learning environment. And so those extra 25 spaces yield about 156 seats. So we're only accommodating in the new layout 367 seats, socially distanced, so that 7-foot bubble to accommodate 482 students. And obviously the 44 stations where you might have students being, learning throughout the facility is a different number when it comes to teachers than 19 teachers in the the original. So, trying to figure that all out, I'm sure is something that is not an easy task that you have in front of you. So this is sort of essentially how this toolkit would work to sort of give you all the idea. So if you need to go to 3 days where you're cycling students through, if you're doing partial entry, or if you only need to, if you're spanning students across a district and you're taking your high school students out and they're learning online at home, and these younger kids are now being spread across the facilities in your district. Here's another way that might be able to help you. So as we know, in the past 15, 20 years, we made a lot of headway with how students learn, how we all learn, how we all work. And we want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. We now know that online learning does not support every single type of learner, but it does support some. And so making sure that we provide as best we can during these types of re-entry, the different types of components within architecture or a room layout, or just the environment alone, even if it is outdoors, for a visual learner, for an auditory learner, or your kinesthetic active learners. Making sure that we provide those things that can still be up on the wall that students can sort of be able to see, digest, and understand. How do we engage and make the most of that student engagement while we're in-person learning? The auditory learner, and making sure that we're capitalizing on that. So those students who may excel when it comes to a recorded lecture or activity online, making sure that we're making the most of that for those folks as well. And then even the kids who are the really active ones, but they're the ones who are going to try and practice and fail, but that's how they learn. Maybe there's an opportunity while it's still warm out to take kids outside and do things in a impromptu sort of out in the field, or maybe there's a hardtop area where you can space apart, but be able to get the wiggles out, but also implement some of your curriculum. And so the rest of the presentation is mostly about the operational consideration, which I know you all have been working on very hard. And as Kemp mentioned, a lot of this may be something that's like, oh yeah, we've got that in our plan already. And so we're gonna try to go through these really, really quick. There may be one or two that maybe hasn't had a lot of discussion yet, and so we wanna make sure we go through them all. We want you to be able to go back and ask questions if needed. So we want to make sure we covered them all, at least quickly as a first blush. Was this mine or your, Kemp?
That's you, Amy.
That's me? Okay, I keep going. All right. So before we even get to school, right, we got to get the kids on the buses. And so what are the things that we're looking at? So I think we've heard that the majority of the buses are going to be, as full capacity as possible. But what do? Is there a methodology for getting on and off the bus? First to last, last to first, that type of thing. Maybe you're busing in a different geographical area so that you're doing pockets. And then if you're doing the little kids coming to school and the high school kids are staying at home, how does that replan where your buses are traveling? Looking at your plan for drop-off. And so drop-off means a lot of things. It means drop-offs for the parents who are dropping off, obviously, where your faculty are coming in and parking and how that traffic works. How are the buses getting in? Those other specialty buses that you may have. Oh, and then the milk delivery that comes always right at the middle of bus drop-off. How do we navigate that and plan for this so that we know that we can get the number of cars that we need to, because in a lot of districts, they may increase come fall.
So outdoor play area considerations include, will structured playgrounds be open? We know that many municipalities have closed them, schools have closed them, lots of surfaces that are impossible to keep clean with continued use. And it's probably not very practical to disinfect between uses, such a large structure as a play structure. There may be, for municipalities that have shared use facilities between Parks and Rec and the schools, for those districts that may have campuses. I know that there are some out there. There may be some additional shared planning that has to occur between the school district and Parks and Rec department And many municipalities have removed things like basketball goals from their basketball courts, but those hardscape play surfaces can be used for other socially distanced activities, and such as outdoor classrooms, as Amy mentioned earlier, things like that. You could have art, science, and even more traditional academic classes outside as well. Go ahead. Who's allowed back to school? I think we've been focusing a lot of attention on that as a society. Will districts require periodic student and/or family test results? How is that managed? Will schools take the temperature of students and faculty as they arrive? Is that part of your plan? Is it at a single point in the building or multiple points? And who will perform this duty? These are all considerations that we need to think of. PPE, who will provide it? How is its use enforced? And then one consideration from the perspective of the built environment is to utilize the existing patterns or rhythms that are within the school to assist students with that safe distancing. As Amy mentioned, the students holding out their arms to separate themselves from their peers. But you can also use the floor patterns that may exist within your existing building, or potentially wall graphics, or even window mullion spacing as guides for the students to be able to keep their distance as they walk through the building.
So again, I think this is something that we're all very in tune with, and so forgive us if it seems very obvious. It wasn't back in April when we started this. Obviously thinking about all of the things that you're going to need to purchase and keep on hand and a constant supply of. And so with the architecture built environment, what we're thinking of is if you begin to stockpile these types of things, what is the storage capacity of your facilities and where does this stuff go? And to take in consideration the storage piece. Another element to consider is what is your emergency planning for when you do drills, right? So as the students have to line up and during a fire drill and leave the building and then congregate in a designated area, are they going to be spaced apart in a safe distance area, or are you going to forego that as long as everyone has PPE on? Identifying in a bus drill when you have that bus pull up, at least in my daughter's school, the older kids get off the back of the bus first and then they help the little kids off, they're holding hands, having them jump down. Again, are these things going to still take place to make sure our schools are safe in other ways, and allowing those parents to understand this drill is happening, we will not be socially distancing, we will have full PPE, whatever it is your plan will be to make sure that these types of things are addressed, especially for kids who have not been to the school and don't know the building. Go ahead.
Amy, I just want to repeat something I said before. Our council is just encouraging me to do this, Patrice McCarthy, and that is you'll only have a partial return if local health authorities say to do a partial return. So it's pretty much expected, at least at this point, and that can change, that everybody will go back at the beginning. But these are things to look at for districts, even if you're all going back at one time, as opposed to some of the social distancing rules that came up before. But I just want to keep reminding people of that, and that a lot of it should be taken care of by your superintendent and staff as they're actually writing writing your plan.
The plan. And also, I think that's a very good point to make, because if unfortunately things go in a very bad way and we get all pulled back home again, well, we are going to have to re-enter again. And so this will still apply when that downturn turns back up. We can apply this again. So this is sort of a living document that could still assist you in a list for your plan, whether it's the plan for September or a plan for next February, whatever that may be, we don't know. So here are the tools to be able to think these things through, and that's all this is for. Good point, though.
Right. HVAC considerations. This has become the hot topic of discussion in recent weeks. And I think if you're not aware of it, there is a guidance document that was put out by the Connecticut Department of Public Health to talk a little bit about how you should think about commissioning your existing systems and potentially using building flushouts and additional outside air. So, but the guidance document was very clear in saying that it's not suggesting investment in costly upgrades, but they do recommend that you ensure your HVAC systems are operating appropriately to handle full capacity. They recommend building flushouts. They talked about possibly a building flushout 1 week before school starts, and then during operation of school, potentially 2 hours ahead and 1 hour after occupancy. These things have costs associated with them, and I think those are things that you're going to need to consider. Also, reprogramming controls to align with the occupancy schedule with those revised outside air requirements. Increased outside air is one of the key recommendations for consideration, as well as higher filtration. And then some other considerations that need to be evaluated, whether it's by your facilities department or an outside firm. Can the system operate with higher filtration? That the increased filtration does have an impact on fan static pressure, and you need to make sure that the system can actually operate with a higher filtration. Other things to consider from a cost perspective are frequency of filter changes, the cost of continuously running fans, and more so than you do today with a more energy efficient approach. And then if you have operable windows in your school, it would be a good opportunity to use these to increase your outside air intake, at least in the shoulder months. Restrooms are another consideration during occupancy. Capacity of the restrooms, scheduling of students, and how you may schedule bathroom visits. Controlling of student pathways in and out of the bathroom is always a challenge, and you want to try and minimize contact with surfaces. May consider assigning a supervisor to a scheduled bathroom visit. One other thing that we use this particular floor plan for is that you may have an organization of your restrooms in one of your buildings or more of your buildings that could permit removal of the door at the corridor, being the door at the top of the page, because the sight lines are cut off just by the organization of the space. And by removing that door, it reduces contact with the door. It also could improve audible monitoring of what's happening in the restroom. So just things to consider. Supplies of soap and paper goods are also something that you need to build into your plan, and the cost of that, and cleaning frequency.
So again, something that you probably already have in plan, but again, as part of the toolkit, understanding the traffic flow of students, maybe from the bus up to classes, and then on the way out, or just during when schools are when the school schedule is in place and they're changing classes. Is that a change of schedule so that they're not they're staggered and they don't cross each other as much? Do we have an upstair and a downstair? Those are the types of things that we need to take in consideration. Access to lockers, is that something that you want to approve? Also understanding where we might have an isolation room for a student or even a teacher or what have you, if they were to show signs of symptoms, and making sure that room has a couple things. You want to have access next to a bathroom as possible. You want observation into that room from outside the room. You want to make sure that there's no carpet, no blinds, no curtains or anything like that on the inside of that room to make cleaning easier. You want a hand wash sink or sanitizer close by, and minimize the contents in that room for cleaning purposes. And in the same token, you want to make sure that you have a satellite location. If this isolation room takes place in the nurse's suite today, you want to have a satellite location for the occasional cuts and bruises and medication distribution that the nurse does on a daily basis.
Food service, each plan is going to have to consider whether or not students actually travel to a cafeteria to eat, or if potentially they stay in the classroom and food is delivered to the classroom. If you go to a larger space such as the cafeteria, are dividers something you may want to consider? Are they practical? Do you think we need dividers between students as they're sitting at a table? By putting dividers, you then, if there's say plexiglass or something like that, you then introduce more surfaces that need to be cleaned. So these are some of the considerations. Also, for students that may opt not to come back to school, as you're currently dealing with today, for those students that are eligible for meals, pickup locations. And do those pickup locations change through seasonally based on this winter? I mean, we can take advantage in the summer and spring and shoulder months to have a pickup location outside, but in the winter months, I think that may need to change and that needs to be planned. And then finally, community use and shelter services. Schools play a much larger role in the community than just schools. They play shelter roles. They, after hours activities, if those are still going to take place, such as Cub Scouts, etc. And what of those facilities need to be available for those activities? Voting is another key activity that happens, and when you're introducing that many outsiders, how do you manage that with the protocols you have in place? With that, I think that wraps up the presentation, and I would like to open it up for questions and answers. We did include some discussion topics toward the bottom. These were just some thoughts that I had when we were putting together the invite. Guidance. There's a tremendous amount of guidance out there. It's information overload. It seems like every day we're getting 10, 12 or more emails or sources of information. And I'd be curious to know if there's any guidance that any of you have found particularly informative or valuable. I think, Bob, you mentioned it earlier, CDC guidance versus what's feasible. I think that's going to be a mainstay to all of your plans. And I'd be interested to know what you've found in your planning thus far to be feasible. Any comments on the Connecticut State Department of Ed plan would be interesting. I'd like to have a discussion about that. Any discoveries that you've found in your planning and or survey results? It'd be interesting to me to know what the results, or even if they're preliminary results, are for how many students plan to go back to school. And then of course the budget impacts, that's the big elephant in the room, the cost of PPE, cleaning and HVAC and so forth, payroll. So kind of open it up to discussion. And if anybody has anything they'd like to offer, we'd love to hear it, or if you have any questions about what we've presented.
So we have a question, we have two from Karen Hirsch. Her first question is, has there been any discussion with the state about revising graduation requirements for required changes to high school schedules to support social distancing and hybrid schedules that might be needed for larger high schools?
I know I haven't heard anything on a discussion of that.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that either, but it's a good question.
Okay.
And I know a lot of districts did change their high school graduation policies this year to account for staggered schedules, I guess is the most that I've seen.
Okay. Second question is, what are your recommendations for high schools that have a large student population and narrow hallways, as high school students cannot truly be cohorted and need to move from classroom to classroom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think that was one thing that, if you could go back, Amy, to the slide with the 2 feet on the floor. One thing that we were talking about amongst ourselves were, creating, you may have to change the use of classrooms. So for example, if you have a lot of math classrooms on one floor and then your English classrooms are on another floor, you may want to, in an attempt to help cohort, allow for classroom types to be on the same floor, so you can help avoid having to go up and down stairs and help minimize the cross circulation between floors and students going up and down. Obviously, one-way corridors, if you can do it, and creating one stair at the end of one corridor as down and the opposite end of the corridor maybe as an up stair. Those types of strategies would help.
And I think that another solution, and I'm not, obviously we're all trying to figure out what's the best solution, but another solution we've seen implemented is the a staggered schedule of some way, shape, or form, whether that's grades or if it's a period or whatever it is, and how they may actually have a staggered system as opposed to having all 4 high school grades traveling through the hallways at the same time. Maybe it's just the freshman class, and then it's the sophomore class or something, however you can divide that up. Whether it's everyone's in their math period and then everyone goes to an English period or something along those lines, but a staggered, just to reduce the quantity further of people in the hallways.
Next question. The state has pushed back on districts that have submitted plans with hybrid weekly models, half the student population in school, half remote learning, and told them all students need to return for 5 days a week. How can we handle the proper social distancing to promote student and staff health and well-being?
It's going to be difficult. That's
the ultimate question, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. I think where you some of the strategies that we talked about, where you transform some of your larger spaces into academic environments, is probably the only way that you're going to be able to manage that in an effective way to get all students back and do your best, whatever is feasible, to maintain as much of the social distancing guidelines that have been out there. We showed a couple of diagrams of how you may divide a gymnasium up into multiple classroom environments. Obviously, there are auditory issues with that because it's just one large open room. Oftentimes, gyms don't have the acoustic reverb qualities that a classroom has, so that's another consideration. And you may want to put in certain types of classes into those spaces. And Amy mentioned in the analysis of the full school that she did that she increased the number of class spaces by 1 because they converted, in that analysis, converted the cafeteria to an academic learning environment. The real problem with that is that she also mentioned was that it increases the number of instructional locations, and a teacher can't be in 2 places at one time. So either you're going to need to increase the number of instructors to account for all the students in a spaced out environment, which is another consideration for your planning.
Some of the examples that we have seen that other schools have implemented, for instance, really thinking outside the box. We saw one school district is planning on holding band practice and/or instruction outside in a tent. Obviously during the months that you can do so, hopefully buying some time before it gets better, maybe when it gets colder and we can be closer together. Also, we've seen in another district where they're actually shortening the school day in time so that the students are not there for the full length of the day, but a shortened amount of time, therefore hoping that the exposure to one another is short enough that it's not, you're not, as if you were like living with somebody. Those are some of the things that we're seeing some folks implement, but we also realize that this is not something that's conducive to every single district because you all are so very different. And I think that we've seen elsewhere in the world where there are actually a first shift and a second shift. So that the students are indeed coming back to school 5 days a week, but they're in a shortened day. And so you have some kids in the morning and the other kids in the afternoon, and then they go home and do homework or the online learning as their homework at the end of the day, but they're still at least in-person learning in some capacity 5 days a week. So these are some of the options that we've seen elsewhere. And of course, it doesn't fit for every single school district.
Next question is from Eileen Baker. Thank you for your presentation. Please advise your experience with ventilation in classrooms for teacher safety. Research is indicating that prolonged exposure without airflow in one room may be in question.
Well, I'll preface with I'm not a mechanical engineer, but I do have enough experience to know, how the systems basically work. As mentioned in the presentation, the DPH guidance is suggesting increased outside air and increased ventilation air. Oftentimes you'll see that systems have what's called a demand controlled ventilation. So when the demand is there to provide ventilation air, that's when it's provided. They are suggesting that those demand controls be modified to just allow 100% outdoor air or constant volume outdoor air to be able to have those air changes per hour increased. Again, if you have operable windows within a classroom, I think it would be an opportunity to open those windows as well and increase the airflow. They do discuss in that document to not use circulation fans within the classrooms. So if you have, for example, a school that doesn't have air conditioning and it is warm in the September or June months, May, June months, they suggest that you do not operate circulation fans simply because it kind of moves air around in an uncontrollable way. Hopefully that answers your question.
Kemp, what was that study again, in case folks want to look that up? It's
on the Connecticut Department of Public Health website. I believe it's on their website. If not, we can make it available through CABE. It's a 5-page guidance document that just recommends commissioning of your systems to make sure that they're able to work, and then it offers guidance on how you may change the controls of your systems to maximize outside air and increase filtration.
Okay, Mexcata, she's asking, has the CSDE ruled on shortened days as you're discussing?
I don't know myself. Yeah, I'm not sure. That was just something that we saw a district implement, and I'm not exactly sure what the ruling was on that.
And Karen Hirsch says, I would assume half days would not allow proper time for cleaning between morning and afternoon classes and would require double the numbers of buses as well. Do you have any information from districts that have done this before as to how to handle the impact to budget and cleaning schedules and teacher contractual hours?
Well, I think where we actually did see this implemented was probably implemented, because they are back to school, was not in this country. And so I think that their how they operate is probably in a different way. The busing situation may have not even been an issue with their particular implementation. At the time, they were just demonstrating that that's what they were putting in place as a practice. They did not mention financially how that financially or for time, how they were able to get the cleaning done in the right amount of time. I think that we need to sort of circle back and see what they're saying now, if they're actually sharing that information.
Okay, the next question is from Greg Keith.
Oh, can I just mention something? We certainly, and the regional advisory teams, looked at the idea of split school days. And it just became much too expensive. There wasn't enough time. And the bus issue itself would double the cost of transportation in the districts.
Right.
You should know that the State Department is now saying 177 days plus 3 days, 177 days or 900 hours are required for the year, but the first 3 days may be used for enabling staff to get ready for the kids, to perhaps get a little training in SEL and to prepare for the year ahead. So there really isn't an opportunity now to do that split, those split days. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few months. Obviously, school districts have to put in 3 different plans, including the hybrid. But at this time, everybody's going back to school for as close to the regular day as possible.
Next question, who does the at-home instruction when teachers are in school for the full opening? Will live streaming from the classrooms be allowed for at-home learning?
Well,
I'm not sure, has the state identified that as far as the part of the plan that's the partial reentry? Is that something that they identify in that plan? I don't recall.
No, what I think is being asked by this question, which is a hard question, is what happens with those who voluntarily decide on a temporary basis to keep their children at home. And the state has not provided any discussion of exactly who can make these kind of decisions, who can do that kind of work. That probably has to be worked out in each school district. There's a lot of talk about using people who have not yet graduated from school, but may be able to provide some help to districts. It's all a question of what's going on in your particular district. What kind of feasibility is there to have other people do some of that distance learning help for our students?
And I'm assuming that the technology ability district to district may vary as well. So that's also part of the question is if they have the ability to access Wi-Fi, if they have the ability to make sure they have a one-to-one device to student, and then also the ability for whoever that instructor is, whether it's a student instructor or the main classroom instructor, to be able to provide that recorded or in-person online learning, all to be determined. And again, maybe district by district, depending on what their abilities are.
We have another question. What analysis did the CSDE go through to conclude that in-person was going to be required of districts in the fall?
Well, the department certainly got some help from the regional advisory teams, as well as the education reopening subcommittee. They looked at it. They first made sure that the health and safety of our students and our staff would be protected to the extent that they could be protected, and that it was safe to re-enter school in this way. I don't know in more detail exactly what they did, but I know that any plan that was developed by the SDE went to the group called the Guidelines Group, which was looking for the health guidance from the from the medical people at the state level. Certainly districts on some of these questions you're asking me can probably better find out from their local Department of Health departments exactly what is appropriate in their school district.
Okay. Next question reads, how can schools accommodate professional development on site and consider distance learning for staff?
I would think that, obviously there's a technological component to that, and perhaps you could set up a classroom or two with the distance learning capabilities, and that could be one way to do it.
I think as far as the spacing, a lot of the same things that you've seen in these diagrams are probably very similar. So depending on the environment that you choose to do that, whether it's in a cafeteria or an auditorium where you have the seats spaced apart, again, with the technology that allows you to potentially connect all of your schools at once, whatever that technology, however that the content needs to be delivered to the teachers.
I don't have any more questions in the chat, in the question box right now. I see that we are
pretty much out of time.
Yes.
I wanted to thank Kemp and Amy for all their hard work in putting this together. Again, it's available on the SLAM website. And if you have more questions, you can send them to me, or you can send them to Kemp and Amy. We appreciate them being one of our partners, one of our business affiliates, and we thank them for all the hard work that went into this. Any last comments, Kemp or Amy?
Well, I just want to thank CABE and you and Will Marie and Lisa for allowing us to coordinate with you and make this presentation. You know, I want to thank everybody that joined us today. Hopefully you found it useful, and I appreciate all the questions. They're hard questions because there aren't any easy answers. And I look forward to the continued development of plans and the continued debate as we move toward getting back to school.
Before we get off, someone asked if you could share the SLAM website address.
Sure. It's right up here. It is www.slamcoll.com. You can see it at the top of the slide here.
And this image should pop up on the homepage.
As I tried it this morning, you got to go to where it says more. That will get you into the document itself.
Right. So that more is a link to the document where you can download a PDF. And again, it's not in the order that you saw today. We modified it today for this presentation specifically. So the same content, just in a different order.
And on the publication that you can download from our website has the contact information for me and Amy on the second page, just so if you do have any questions or any further discussion you'd like to have with one of us, happy to have that discussion with you.
And I just want to repeat that board members, your superintendents and staff are coming up with the 3 plans that you need. They have to get them in by Friday to the department. From what I understand, the department does not necessarily approve them, but they will certainly look at them, look for best practices, figure out what's best for districts, and hopefully they will provide more information and more clarity in some of the issues that have been raised today and other issues that will come up. Certainly, CABE will continue to put out information on the role of the board member in all of this. And certainly we understand that there are going to be lots of questions. This is a very fluid situation. Things may change before we go back to school, but we'll keep you up to date. And with that, I want to close this out. And again, thanks SLAM for their hard work here. And we look forward to seeing board chairs on Thursday at 11 a.m. And certainly in the next few weeks, you'll be hearing, or the next week, you'll be hearing about information about becoming part and joining our summer conference. It's going to be online this year, a number of different days, and some really interesting topics. So with that, I thank you, and I close out this webinar.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.